Hi everybody, my name is Joe Pavitt and I am the lead developer for the FlowFuse Dashboard, also known as Dashboard 2.0. In today's tutorial we're going to be covering data visualization, and first off we're going to explore a variety of different data types and data sources that you're likely to come across in the real world, and then we'll explore the library of charts and gauges available in Dashboard. We'll be covering line charts, bar charts, histograms, pie charts, donut charts and gauges, and even different types of gauges, boundary gauges, level gauges and dials and stuff like that. So hopefully this is going to be interesting for you. Hopefully you learn something and then are able to go away and build your own really cool and shiny visualizations. So welcome to the Node-RED editor. As I mentioned, we're actually going to start off here with exploring some different data types, and I want to quickly walk you through what they're going to be before we start doing some data visualization. The first type that we have here is actually a slider from the Dashboard 2 widget. So just drag that on, and with that we got given a page and a group that I've just renamed. I have set up the layout type of the page to be a notebook, and just to show you what that then looks like, because I can also demonstrate how this then looks in our debug node. You can toggle on and off debug nodes with this little button here without the need of actually deploying every time or deleting your debugs. So if I go into my dashboard and I move this slider around, then all of the different numbers are output here. So the first data type that we have is a number. Our message.payload, as previously covered in the Getting Started tutorial, if you watched that, is our main way of transporting data around within Node-RED. And here our message payload is 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? It's just a number. And we will cover how to visualize that kind of data. So if I clear this out, and then show you the next type of data, I actually have a Raspberry Pi sat on my desk with a SCD4 something sensor on it, which is outputting temperature, CO2 and humidity every 5 or so seconds. And there it goes. My CO2 concentration is very high. I should probably get outside at some point. But yeah, this is some data that it gives us something to play with. And the structure here is a JSON object. It is a single data point every single time. And each of the different data points, each of the single data points here contain 3 possible things we might want to visualize. All right. And again, once we actually go to visualizing this, I'll cover how you can do that. And then finally, I'm just going to toggle this back off and clear that out. We have array-based data. So a final little data set that we'll explore is an array, if I turn the debug node on, is an array of data about Star Wars characters. So here we get 82 results, although it's paginated to just the first 10. But for example, we get C-3PO, what their height is, what their mass is, their skin color, their eye color, and all that kind of stuff, right? So we will explore how, if you were retrieving data from a database, for example, how you could take this data and visualize it. And then finally, the last data set that I've got is similar. It's just a little bit more formal, I guess. It's just a made up data set where each data point has a year, a quarter, and an earnings. It's just a random number. So again, I will show how you can break that down. This one's particularly useful for grouping data because you can group by the year, you can group by a quarter. So yeah, I'll show you how you can group data into stacked charts, into bar chart, into pie chart series and that kind of stuff. But yeah, that's what we're going to get going through. But I wanted to give you a quick overview on what the data is that we're going to be working with going forward. So to get started with our data visualization, we're going to need something to draw our data on, and we're going to use our chart node for that. I'm going to drag this chart node in underneath our debug node, and we'll double click it. That little red triangle just means it needs to be configured, and we currently don't have a group to put this in, although actually, yeah, we can just put it into the single number group for now. That makes sense because it's in with the slider. And then we're going to scroll down, and some of you may have also realized, I will quickly mention, yes, I've had a haircut, and yes, I've shaved. The first part of this tutorial was recorded on Friday. Today's Monday. We're just going to move on, but I thought I'd at least acknowledge it. The defaults for the chart node are that the X value is going to be a timestamp in the same way that our inject, every time we click and inject, it generates a timestamp as of now. The chart is the same. If we set this to be timestamp, any new data comes in, it will read the relevant Y value and just set X to be now. And now slider is emitting via message.payload. Everything that the slider goes out, our debug node was showing that because it renders message.payload. So here, message.payload will be our slider value. And series, we don't need a series actually. Right now we've not got multiple groups of data, so we just do none. And we'll hit done. and we'll wire the slider into our chart. So now when I click on my slider, every time I click and every time my slider moves, I can drag it and make lots of data points. Every individual one of those messages emitted gets added to my chart as a new data point. So that's kind of the most simple chart you can do, albeit not too valuable, not too useful. So let's try and have a little look at something else. We're going to jump over to our debug window and just remind ourselves what the hardware data looks like. So I'm going to copy this chart and wire this data now into our new chart. And this was an object, so our message.payload in this case won't work because the whole thing here is our payload. So instead what we actually want to do is let's do CO2 concentration for now. So instead of message.payload, we want message.payload CO2, capital C, CO2 concentration. And again, every data point coming in is going to have a new timestamp associated to it. And we can hit done. And actually, rather than putting that into the single number thing, I'm just going to hit plus group here, and we'll just have hardware data as a new group, and that goes onto the same page. And then we will quickly rename this chart as hardware. Yep. Done. Deploy. Oh, need to move it into that group. Deploy. So now, from an ordering perspective, we have some hardware data. So now every time a new message comes in, we can plot our CO2 concentration. You can see here the axis is already starting at 1,159, just because that's what the first data point was. We can change that. If we go to our y-axis, we can just put a minimum of 0 on that. And then now, I mean, basically a flat line. It's probably not so useful to do that, because then you can't see any changes. But we could even just put into 1,000 just to give it a little bit of breathing room, and you can see some slight variation there. So yeah, we've still got our slider, we've now got our hardware data, and the joy of the new method that we have here is actually that instead of CO2 concentration, if I want to render temperature, I don't have to go back through a function node as you did in the original dashboard. I just change that key. I can clear my chart history there, hit done, and so now every new message that comes in, when a new one comes in, hopefully the axis is still going to be broken because our temperature is definitely not 1,000 degrees. So I'll reset that back down to 0, and then hopefully when a new piece of data comes in, he says optimistically, there it is. So we now have the temperature data in here. It's going to be very difficult for me to increase the temperature very quickly, but that is now rendering the temperature data as we get new data points coming in, which is great. So now we've shown how we can plot individual data, so just a standard message payload from a slider. We've seen how we can take an object coming in from an MQTT topic and render temperature or relative humidity or CO2 concentration. The last data sets that we had were our arrays of data. So let's say we're loading this up. I'm just going to hide that debug actually. Let's say we were loading this up from a database or from an API, as we're going to do here. I can inject and I get now a list of Star Wars characters. Now the data that I actually want to render isn't this whole thing. It's just this list of items here. So for that, what we're actually going to use is a change node, and it means that we can set message.payload to be equal to message.payload.results. So then now that will just get rid of all of this other guff around it, basically. So if I hit deploy and inject again, rather than getting all of it, we just get the array, which is what we care about. That's the thing we actually want to visualize. So we're going to add a new group, and we're going to call this Star Wars data, and we're going to add a new chart. Shift that debug node down. We're going to add a new chart in here, and we're going to call this Star Wars characters, and we're going to put it into our Star Wars data group. Now here, because we're loading from an API, or it could be from a database, we don't want to append our data to this chart every time. Anytime I send data to this chart, I just want to replace whatever's already there. So we're going to click replace as our action. And we're actually going to draw this as a bar chart. And we will group, we're not going to do grouping in this, but side-by-side action as a default is fine. The x-axis label we're going to do as character name, and the y-axis we'll come on to in a moment. So previously we were generating our x value from timestamp, right? It wasn't part of the data we were receiving. Whereas this time around, we actually want to use the name of the character as the x-axis. So we're going to have one bar for every character. So in here, we can go in and say, now we can't do message. We couldn't do message.payload.name because we're all in an array. So message.payload is actually a full array. So you'd have to do, if you wanted to do something like that, you'd have to index it dot name, but you can't do that because then that's only ever going to then read the first element of your array. So that's why we have this option called key. Now key will just automatically go and say, oh, is it an object or is it an array? So it will still work if you send individual objects as well. And I'll get the property that you've given me, the key that you've given me, that matches whatever value you've defined. So here it will say the x value is key.name. So it will be Luke Skywalker, then C3PO, and so on. And similarly, for now, on our y-axis, we're going to use key and we'll just do height. And we don't need to worry about series because we're not grouping this data by anything. We're just having a bar for each of the different characters. It will pick up on these colors. You can modify them in your own fun. And again, I'm going to set a minimum of 0 on the y-axis just so it looks okay. And then if we deploy this up, and we have our bar chart kind of template ready to go, and I click inject. And now we have a bar chart which shows all of the different heights of all of the different characters. And as before, if we said, actually, no, I didn't mean to do height, I meant to do mass instead. All I've got to do is jump in here and do mass, hit deploy, re-inject, and because we've done replace, I don't even need to clear the chart manually. We can just replace it, and this is now showing the mass of all the different characters, and you get interactive tooltips, which work quite nicely as well. So that's a really nice starting point, I guess, to visualizing array-based data. And you can, if you're loading up from a database or whatever it might be, yeah, you want to load up all of that. You want to have a bar per character. That works quite nicely. So let's instead say that we want, I'm going to go on a bit of a limb actually, this is going to be unplanned, but I just thought of a nice idea. Let's do a scatter plot, and on the x-axis I'm going to have the height, on the y-axis I'm going to have the mass, and then the series can be the name. So what that will do is that will give us a dot on a scatter plot. That should be everything we need. Yeah, we can give that a go. So we hit deploy, and then we inject that again. Now on our scatter plot, it is unfortunately broken, so that's good. Is that because I've done a timescale x-axis? It is. Let's try linear instead, because we aren't sending time data. Hit inject, and there we go. Now we have a scatter plot with the axis is labeled wrong because I forgot to update that as well. So our x-axis is height, and the y-axis is mass. Hit done, hit deploy, and now we can see again. You get all the interactive tooltips. You can also use these as interactive elements as well, just to hide and show particular pieces. But we have Darth Vader up here, who is the tallest and the mass, and you kind of get a little bit of a linear into a kind of correlation, which is what you would expect. So yeah, it's a really nice little demo of just showing you how flexible the chart node is. The last one that we're going to look at is our finance data. I'm just going to bring this down here a little bit. So just to remind you what our finance data looks like, if I inject that, we have an object per year and quarter. So we're going to add in a new chart, and we're going to add another bar chart, and we're going to add a new group on the same page, and it's going to be called finance data. And here we are going to do a bar chart, and this group by is going to be relevant as well, and I'll show you that in a moment. So on our x-axis we want the year, so it's going to be key and year. Actually no, let's do quarter. Quarter. Our y value is going to be key dot earnings, and we're going to group by, so there's naturally at the moment going to be multiple objects that have the same quarter. So it would clash, right? It would go, oh, well, I've got Q1 at 115, I've also got Q1 at 142. So that's where the series is really useful, because you can group by. You can say, actually, there's an extra dimension of data here, which is going to be the year. And so then what that means it will do is, if I hit done and deploy, it helps if I actually wire it in, and I draw that, that now has said on our x-axis we had the quarter, and we have a series for each year. So we have 2 bars now, one for each of the 2 years of data that I have, rendering for each X point on this. And it's currently rendering them side by side. If instead we said, actually, no, I want to render them stacked, we just hit stacks, done, deploy, re-inject the data, and now they're drawing stack charts. And if, again, you wanted to switch that around even more, we could have actually done quarter and year instead. Hit done, deploy, inject the data. And that didn't clear the data properly, so let's just quickly clear the chart history. And there we go. Now we have our 2021 earnings, our 2022 earnings, and we've actually got a series or a group per quarter. So that's bar charts, line charts, scatter charts, just to show you what this looks like in, I guess, a different bar chart type. What could we show? A pie chart could work quite nicely here. We can keep them the same, although actually that's probably going to be better that way round, subject to being able to spell the word quarter. If I hit delete and deploy, now let's clear that data again, clear chart history. So we do our very best to try and maintain history. Sometimes it doesn't quite work. So there's no data here right now. If I re-inject, now we have a bar on the outside for the year 2021 and inside for 2022. And again, you have each of the different colors based on the different quarter breakdown. So that's a pie chart. A donut chart is basically the same thing. That should just work straight out. Yeah, there we go. We've maintained that quite nicely without needing to re-inject data or anything or clear the history. So if you want that aesthetic instead, that also works quite nicely. And then histograms I'm going to come on to in a moment, but we have covered at least the first 5 chart types there. And so hopefully you were able to follow along. And yeah, we're going to cover histograms next. So the last chart type that we're going to look at is the histogram. We're then going to move on to gauges soon after, but from the chart node itself, we've covered the other chart types. The last one is a histogram. Now I've left this till last because it is slightly different to the others. In that with the others, we've had a full data set and our X and our Y data has been contained within that existing data set, or for X, for example, we generate a timestamp. The idea behind a histogram is that you're tracking frequency of items. So it's really useful if I bring in an example data set here, and I'll include these into the description. If we have a data set like this, whereby we have a ping basically from an instance of a piece of software, and this is actually modeled on our data that we get for the ping data for FlowFuse when we have self-hosted instances. So we get the age, which is then a number of days. We get what version it's running on, what license they're using, and what operating system that's running on. And what we want is a single view that just says, well, how many instances are running that are 90 days old, 100 days old, or whatever it might be. And we can then see a distribution when we want to break that down by, okay, well, which ones are running Linux, which ones are, what software versions are they running running free licenses or paid licenses, whatever it might be. So this is a really nice data set to be able to use on a histogram, because we can track the frequency of, for example, how many times are we seeing version 2.13, version 2.45, how many times are we seeing age less than 30. So I'm going to give you a quick demo of that now, and to do so we're going to add a new group. I'm going to jump in here and we're going to call this histograms, and we are going to go in here and we're going to add that into our histograms group. And the new feature that you'll see here for histogram, there's a couple of different options. There's x-axis type, which is either going to be categorical or bins. Now, if the number that we want on our x-axis is a number, if the value on our x-axis is a number, i.e. days old, bins is really good, because we could say, actually, I want you to render between 200 maximum and 0 and create 10 bins. So between 0 and 20, between 20 and 40 and so on. And it will just count the frequency that those number of days appear. Or if, for example, we wanted our x-axis to be the different versions, we just wanted to count the number of versions, categorical would also make sense here. Because then in that case, for example, and I can just show you this, I think it's just a version from memory, although we'll quickly check. Ignore that. Deploy. Clear that out. There we go. Helps if I actually put it into a debug node instead. Don't know why that's complaining. What are you complaining about? Hardware. That's weird. Don't know why that's suddenly done that. I must have deleted a thing by accident earlier when I was not recording, so I'll just put that in there for now. So software usage data, expand this out, and we have version on our x-axis, so we can do that. That's our key. And then the series, if we do none, we're just going to get a single bar that shows the number of times each of these versions appear, which seems a little bit high because we're doing append, not replace. And then if I send that in, we actually have 5 of each of them in this data set because I didn't distribute them very well. But if actually, instead of showing no series, because we just at the moment got a single bar for each of them, actually if I want to break that down by what operating system they're doing, let's now do key OS. And if I re-inject that data into the chart, now I'm seeing a breakdown of each of the versions broken down by the operating system each of them are using. And we've got that side by side. If instead we wanted that stacked, we could also do that. So we can put it into stacks on the group by, hit deploy, send the data in, and now we have our stacks running instead. Odd that 267 has been added in twice. Don't quite know why that's happening. Let's just check that. It might be a bug I have to go and fix offline. Yeah, for some reason we're getting 267 appear as 2 separate pieces. I'm going to guess that's a bug, but I will investigate that off. But yeah, fundamentally that is how a histogram works, is that you then track the frequency and you can break this down by a lot of different things. So if I instead, just to demonstrate the bin data, group by, x-axis type bins, we're going to go from 0 to 200, 10 bins is fine. And so that means now here, where we had version before, instead I actually want this days number. And to get a nested thing, you just do age.days. And it will go and get age days and then use that automatically. And then our series is going to be version. So now it will tell us a breakdown of what version everyone is using and broken down by the number of days old that operating system, that particular version is running for. So we're seeing most things running between 20 and 40 days, for example. And then you can use this to look at different patterns. Again, you could put that as a side-by-side chart. But yeah, the idea is that this is a really useful way of generating that frequency data. If you've got maybe, for example, tickets coming in from a factory and you just want to see what frequency of different ticket types you're getting, this is a really nice way of visualizing that and going forward. So I'm just going to quickly put a comment in here just so we can make sure that we've got this nice and easily tracked. And then the last thing we're going to move on to are gauges. So deploy that out. Let's clear our debug and move down to some gauge stuff. And this one's last section is actually going to be fairly small. The gauges are quite simple really, because they all require just a single input. So I'm going to jump over here and we're going to drop our gauge on. And I'll quickly talk you through some of the options here. And actually I will add in a new group, gauges. And believe it or not, that's where we're going to put our gauges. So we've got a 3x3 gauge, which is actually a nice demonstration as well, because everything here is width 6. So these gauges actually will be 3x3, so there'll be 2 side by side in a moment when I add them. And there's a few different gauge types. We're in the process of building even more now, and I think we've got a thermometer gauge on the way at the point of recording this tutorial. So if I do a half gauge, and this is currently going from 0 to 10. So a really nice way of demoing this is with a slider, which also goes from 0 to 10. Let's move that into the gauges group, hit done. So then if I scroll down and I go and find where that's been added to, there it is. And I can move this along, and then this is my gauge. You've got a little delay there, but as a new number comes in, my gauge updates accordingly. If I then say, actually, I want this to be a 3/4 gauge instead, hit deploy. And then you see a 3/4 gauge, which works quite nicely. So the other gauges that we have here are a tile gauge, which is worth demonstrating. For this one, it's a fixed label. So my label, for example, and then the color of that tile is dictated by the thing in the background. So this is really useful for if you've got a factory and you just want a single dashboard that's telling you whether things are going well, you've got lots of green tiles, or if areas are going bad, you might want red tiles, and then the label can just dictate which area of the factory. You can also update these labels, and I will show you how. This is a common pattern across every node in Dashboard, actually. So you can send in a message that is, rather than payload, UI_update, and in this case it's label that we want to change. We're going to call this, I'll just put this in as an example of a dynamic label. So if I check first, that says my label. If I instead inject that, it now says dynamic label. So what you could have is a change node here or something like that checks the message payload coming in, and then based on the message payload sets different labels. You can change all sorts of stuff. If we actually just quickly jump over to the documentation, this is at dashboard.flowfuse.com. Go getting started, and on the left hand side you'll see gauge, and then dynamic properties, and these are all the things that you can change in addition to message payload. So you can change the gauge type on the fly, you can change the icon that's being rendered in, the style that max them in, and everything. So yeah, that's the case. That pattern of message.UI_update is applicable to all of the nodes in Dashboard 2, or in FlowFuse Dashboard. So that's the first type of gauges. I'm going to quickly then also introduce you to battery and tank level. These now actually go from 0 to 100. So let's just add a different slider that goes from 0 to 100. And this one we're going to call battery. It's going to be at battery level, and it automatically has some defaults. Again, we'll just use those for now. We're not going to change them. So then if I change this one, then that now reflects my battery level. If you want a vertical battery level, all you got to do is change the shape of it so that it's taller than it is wider, and it will render. And then the last one is the tank level, which again, 0 to 100, it defaults the blues to kind of represent water tank level, but if you have oil tank or anything like that, then that's also a really good thing to use this for. And you get a nice little wave animation as the level of that changes. So yeah, the different gauge types we talked through, you've got tile, water level, battery level, half gauge, 3/4 gauge. I think we've got thermometer on the way, and no doubt there'll be many, many more in the future. There's also some great community gauge nodes as well that are out there, like classic gauge and Edgewise are two of the great ones I've seen so far. So thank you for the community contributors on those. So overall, like I say, we've covered a lot here. We've covered all the different data types that hopefully you're going to cover and at some point, the different chart types, the different gauge types, and how you can take those in Dashboard and manipulate them and use the chart gauge to visualize them in different ways and gain insight from them. There will be more chart types in the future, right? We're ever evolving this piece of software, so by the time you're watching this, there may even be more. But yeah, please do feel free to ask any questions. Reach out on the forums or in support tickets on flowfuse.com, or yeah, wherever you want to reach out to us, then please do so. But yeah, I can't wait to see what you guys can build. That's been an introduction to data visualization in Dashboard. in FlowFuse Dashboard. And yeah, on the next part, we're going to be covering layouts and templates and a few other bits and pieces in this future series. So please do subscribe if you're not already, because we have got a lot of these videos planned on how to work with Dashboard in Node-RED. Thanks a lot.